item to approve notice of intent not to reemploy school registered nurses and physical education teachers for 2012-2013 school year.
If we could just hear from staff, Susan Lugo, if you could just explain this agenda item a little bit more to us.
The agenda item that you're seeking more information on perhaps might be better moved towards after, if possible, towards after the meet and confer presentation, because it is aligned to, and my apologies if that was put in the wrong spot, it is aligned to some of the meet and confer recommendations for balancing the budget.
Is that sufficient? So we would hold the item, I guess table it for discussion later in the agenda tonight.
Do you want a motion or do you want me to?
You can, it's the next.
I motion that we table agenda item 6H until after item 9A.
Second.
The motion has been moved and seconded to move this agenda item to after the meet and confer advisory committee recommendation. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. We will consider that in a few minutes. The next item then is personnel, meet and confer advisory committee recommendations. Dr. Boyle.
Dr. Susan Lugo, with members of the Meet and Confer Advisory Committee, will be presenting recommendations in alignment with Policy HC, scope of Meet and Confer.
Thank you.
I guess that's as good as it gets. Good evening. I'm sorry. Good evening, President and members of the Governing Board and Cabinet. Thank you for having us here this evening. I have as co-presenters Mr. James Diaz and Mr. Scott Walmer to assist with today's presentation. But the whole Meet and Confer team really should be commended for their hard work, both before, during, and we're going into our loop-out sessions very shortly, where we visit all the sites and departments with the information once you have your recommendations. So if you see, there's a nice representative of all different sites, certified, classified, and administration on the Meet and Confer team. And the Meet and Confer team engaged in an interest-based process led by our facilitator, Cheryl Anderson. And she's done trainings with us over the years and led us through the process. I know you've seen this slide before because we use it for many of our committee meetings and our advisory committees, because we really do believe in the process, that it may be, although a little more time consuming sometimes, to get out the whole story and different groups' interests, and having our standards and how well do we measure up to our own standards and how deeply we can commit to the decisions we make. We do feel it is a very valid process in getting to critical decisions. And I think this one's James' slide. So we're going to go back and forth here.
Good evening. This is basically the policy that we followed within the scheme of Meet and Confer. So the scope of Meet and Confer included the wages, salaries, and salary schedules. It's basically to give people an idea about things that are permissible to talk about within Meet and Confer, and more importantly, things that are not as well. This is a slide that we put in here because sometimes there's the perception that we do not involve enough people in the process and looking for feedback and input from all stakeholders that we possibly can. So we went through here, we came up with some of the things that have been done throughout the year. Things that we took into consideration jointly during the Meet and Confer process was the National Staff Development Council Standards Assessment Inventory. This is a survey that goes out once a year through the state where questions are asked about working conditions and other types of things. We used that data as well as an all-staff survey that was completed by the entire staff throughout the entire district. And it had a very specific question that was asked, and we've got a lot of good feedback and a lot of good input from all people, all employees throughout the district. The administrative side held community council meetings throughout the year, parent meetings, and had leadership council meetings as well too. On the Creighton Education Association side, we went through and we talked with a few homeowners associations. We also did phone banking, where we made personal phone calls before, during, and after the process to encourage people to participate, and that was primarily our message. We see ourselves as a conduit, and we are not to advocate one way or another. So at the beginning of the process, we went through and said, take the all-staff survey. It is important. Your input is important. And during, we didn't do anything during. After the phone bankings were done to encourage people to participate in the ratification process. All our members and people were participating in that to vote to support the Meet and Confer document or to not support it. And we also encouraged members and people to talk to people at their sites and different departments as well. Personal conversations, just to let people know, because sometimes people get confused about some of the things that are on it because they see their own little personal piece of the pie and they don't see the entire district. So some of that is a little bit of clarification. And our hope is by going through and having this feedback and this input that we can involve as many people as we possibly can. Because sometimes there's the perception that people say, well, administration doesn't support me, CEA doesn't support me, and sometimes people feel that they're not being represented. And there's a feeling that sometimes that those people are mostly interested in their own personal agenda and not necessarily the entire district. However, I will say that it is important that every voice is heard from all different avenues as well too. So that's important.
James?
Yes, sir.
In terms of, I mean, I definitely have seen some of these things in motion, in real time, but in terms of the all-staff survey, I appreciate the efforts to incorporate staff opinions on these discussions and working jointly with the administrative team. What type of survey response did you get?
Actually, I don't know if it's appropriate, but we do
Yes,
have.
absolutely.
These were the results, and there's a caveat with this as well too, which I'll explain. This is the results from the survey itself, but I do want to point out something important that you do need to be aware of as well. Part of this survey, I think this survey was gone out for 2 weeks, maybe 3, and the whole purpose was to get feedback and input, but let's see, how do I say this? That some of it you have to be careful with as well too, because there were some issues with the validity of it as well too, like some of the data itself. So, and we can certainly clarify that as we go a little bit further, but the ideas and the concepts within them were very valuable in terms of developing conversations and plans as well too.
Right. So more importantly than the percent that they agree with the specific item, but what percent of the staff actually took the survey? Did 100% of staff do that, 50%? I don't know if you have that.
Do we have that information?
Yeah, we had over 300 participants. Over 300.
Yeah, but it wasn't everybody. And like I said, it's important to understand that okay, here's the thing, that the survey itself is not necessarily confined to the district, okay? We don't have complete control over the survey itself, so there is a possibility that the survey could have gone out to people outside of the district. So I do want to make sure that that's clear. So even though we had over 300 people that participated in the survey,
Right.
you can't necessarily assume that all those people are current employees in the district. That's where
Yeah.
we had some issues and concerns with the validity of some of the input that was happening.
Okay.
That is important to point out.
Okay, so this is the same one we call all staff survey. We recognize that other than staff may have participated in it.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Correct.
May I ask a follow-up on that? What, Mr. Diaz, what was the procedure that was used for sending this out to staff?
It was primarily done through email.
So then, would it be correct to assume then that the means that anyone who was not an employee of the district might have gotten it would have been through a forwarded email? Is that how that could happen?
That is a possibility.
So in other words, it was distributed to our employees and only to our employees, but am I correct in that? And that there was no identification that anybody had to enter to take the survey, and therefore we
No.
couldn't verify.
The only restrictions we put on it were that it was tethered to one particular computer.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure about that.
Okay.
But like I said, I do want to point out that there is a distinct possibility that some of the information comes from employees that are not currently employed this year. So,
Thank you.
okay. Okay. Let's go on.
And I'm sorry, on the slide that says, on my slide it appears to be crossed out, personal conversations, site/departments. Is that a slash through on that, and if so, why? Okay.
That's just the
how it-
the slide. Yeah.
Okay,
No,
great.
we didn't negate that. Although with the survey, there was a link posted on a Facebook page as well as on a CEA page. So therefore, we questioned the validity of that survey.
Thank you.
Okay, so when the Meet and Confer team meets, we meet jointly and come up with some of the story and some of the issues that need to be addressed. Once we met, and we have recommendations that will be coming before you on the following topics that have to do with budget, health, and safety. Remember, everything needs to be aligned with policy HC, which is wages, salaries, and benefits, and conditions of work. So all these things fit in there: staff retention, planning time, and then we had looking at contract time for some office staff as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Wallner for budget.
This was the impact to our M&O and M&O-like funds for the 2012-13 school year. The enrollment decline, 65 students or so, is about $250,000. Classroom site funds, which we had been spending in excess of revenues in order to offset for a year or number of years, it is now down to even, and we can't do that anymore, so that's $247,000. One-time federal monies, part of the ARA program, was used to offset further reductions for 1 year, and $500,000 to offset rising costs of the retirement system, health insurance, utilities, etc. So about $1.6 million is what we're looking at. This slide is simply to note that 90% of our funding in M&O and ancillary M&O kinds of funds is about 90%. So when you go to cut $1.6 million out of a budget, we're kind of limited in where we can go. And here is our recommendation for 2012-13. To run through the line items briefly, a reduction to our substitute teaching budget. proposing to add some civic center funds. That's about half of the funds in our site rental funds. So those are the monies that come in from our preschools and from any other homeowners association, et cetera, who rent our classrooms to hold meetings in. We're proposing to use some of those funds to offset for 1 year further reductions. Reductions to our speech program, as well as registered nurses. Reductions to our various departments of $100,000. Classroom staffing, which will have some further details upcoming. A reduction to our PE staffing and band as well, to total $1.6 million.
Will all of these be in detail in the slides to come, or if I have questions?
Classroom staffing, anything else? I would recommend asking questions now.
Okay, can you remind, I know we talked about this previously, but in terms of the PE reduction, what was it reduced from?
Currently, at all of our sites except for Biltmore Prep, there are 2 PE teachers. So it would be reduced from there to 1 PE teacher plus an assistant, which we're looking at a highly qualified aide, but we have not worked out the details. Do you need information on how those placements are going through?
So the cost savings would come from having an extra teacher and adding an assistant instead?
The cost savings comes from a reduction of those teachers, and actually all but 1 teacher will be able to find placements for because of their qualifications and certifications in our regular teaching staff. One does not have appropriate certification that matches to district needs, has a 712 certification, and the only area of highly qualified is not an area that we offer in our middle grades.
So did we also change the qualifications for?
The qualifications, in order to do these reductions in the most legally defensible way, I would recommend that we use their areas of qualifications and their certificates, as well as their areas of being highly qualified. So the manner in which to do these kind of placements, looking at defensible, when we're making these kind of judgments, your qualifications are closest to what we can go. So we looked at first all of our PE teachers in the district and first looked at their certification. Are they able to teach students from kindergarten to 8th grade? Then the next level was looking at, are they highly qualified in the area of which we're asking them to teach? So then all the teachers who were appropriately certified K through 8 and then highly qualified in the area of PE were the first ones to be placed. We have 2 appropriately certified and highly qualified teachers at one site. Pending this recommendation goes through, one will be asked to volunteer to move, or I'll have to go through an involuntary transfer. That would leave 1 position open for one opening where we don't have a highly qualified person, and I would suggest that we allow those current PE teachers who are being absorbed into the system to apply for that position and work on their certification.
So is it the case then, Dr. Lugo, that, excuse me, that if a PE teacher were not certified, that they could still potentially get that 1 job teaching PE next year then? I'm sorry, not have a PE certification.
Correct. That we could do that, should we choose to go in that route. And I think that would probably be palatable rather than hiring a highly qualified, appropriately certified PE teacher from the outside, because we do have very many dedicated, as you heard from Ms. Raines, staff who have worked very, very hard. Yet I need to go by the most legally defensible way for placement first.
Mhm.
And so would there be an interview process then for that?
Yes.
So Dr. Lugo, I mean, this isn't the first time we've had this type of conversation. I know when I got on the board, we were faced with reduction in force, and we looked at what our policy was, and I know that just looking at years of service and certification never for me really set well. I wanted to know who's the most effective and keep our leaders and support that, and we're not there yet in terms of developing that system. And I know we're going to hear more about that later. But on top of that, we put into place a new policy regarding reduction in force. How does that coincide with the recommendation here, or does it?
It does. If we look at the reduction in force policy, it talks about doing transfers first and placements first, based on qualification before actually reducing in force. So remember, reduction in force is people losing their job, losing contracts. So our reduction in force procedures that we put into place first looks at involuntarily transferring people into positions before we have people actually losing paid positions.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned this is the most legally defensible, I think that's language you used, way to proceed. What would be the second, third? What are the alternatives in?
I think the alternative would be to use the reduction in force rubric that we have. And I don't have the actual policy in front of me, but I can see the line where it talks about transferring people before actually inputting that rubric. The challenge with the rubric, as you alluded to, is the ability to judge performance on the evaluation. You know, we have our evaluation tools, we have committees, work that people have done, and all those factors playing into place. We don't have the student achievement data at this time as part of that rubric.
And on that rubric, if I remember correctly, there were points for community leadership, school-wide leadership, things like that.
There are also points for credentials.
Okay.
So so we have this rubric, but why is it more defensible to go just by whether someone has a specific endorsement or specific type of certification than to go by the rubric that is within our policy?
Because the rubric, I would say, is open to more subjectivity. It's very objective. You have your certification and you're highly qualified in this area or you're not. We're also transferring people. The one PE teacher that you see on the list for actual true reduction in force is because that person is not highly qualified nor appropriately certified. I couldn't have that person teach PE next year because that person would have to teach K-12 and is only certified is K-8, I'm sorry, and is only certified 7 through 12.
Any other comments, questions? Thank you.
Okay. Oops, back to you.
So if there is an advantage to this budget recommendation, it's that there is no pay cut and there's no insurance cost sharing like there has been in prior years. And one thing that's worth mentioning, in future years, we do have monies on the table or included in this budget that offset future cuts, such as the $600,000 in Medicaid support and the $125,000 Civic Center that is not sustainable. I mean, it might be sustainable for a couple of years, but eventually those will be on here as reductions. Or if, you know, if funding were to increase, some of that would have to offset those unsustainable expenditures that we have included in our budget.
So you probably noticed one of the budget lines for the staffing changes. We would like to move forward from changing the concept of staffing ratios, which we currently have, to capping our classrooms. The majority of our classrooms right now are not at the capacity of which the standard or the ratio is staffed for. K4, just as a reminder, it's 1 to 27 and 5-8, 1 to 32. Although I know that the board and the superintendent hears about the outliers. There are outliers with the class size average that is over that, and I can show you a little bit more information on that. Going towards a cap would increase the numbers of classrooms that are at the district standard, and we would need to make adjustments for further outliers.
Before you proceed on that one, Dr. Lugo, can you quickly tell us again about substitutes? I know like we have a limited budget for substitutes, and when we don't have substitutes, our teachers pick up the slack. And what does that look like? And how this new concept impact the substitute issue?
Okay, let's see, we're talking a couple of things. So with the substitute budget, we're looking at further reducing the number, we call them shifts, that each school is allocated based on the number of teachers requiring substitutes and factoring out for FMLA. So those shifts aren't counted against the schools. The times when there aren't substitutes in the classroom, the administration and the teachers pull together to do a number of things. They split the classes. They cancel the special areas, PE, art, and music in order to make this happen. Depending on the class size, splitting the classes is going to become increasingly more difficult.
Right. Okay, so if we have a cap and we have a substitute shortage, if we reach the capacity, I guess that becomes, would this be one of the outliers?
This would further impact the problem.
Do we ever have a substitute shortage?
You know, there are times when we are unable to. Yeah, it's really not. It's very stressful on the teachers and very, very, very stressful on everyone involved. We have a further increased sub pool, and there are times with springtime. It seems like where people would rather enjoy the weather. We also have sometimes staff development where an increasing number of subs are used to cover grade levels for valuable professional development opportunities, yet we still have the same needs of number of people who are ill or out that day.
And we're further reducing the substitute capacity.
We're further reducing the number of shifts allocated to each site based on the number of teachers.
How significantly? Is that going to be in one of the recommendations?
Scott, you want to talk to that one? Because it was complex.
Until 2 years ago, we did not have a substitute budget. It was treated, like the utility budget, like the power bill. Then 2 years ago, we did reduce it. I'm trying to remember the figure. It's not at my fingertips. $130,000, I believe. 2 schools had to be contacted during the year because they had used their allotment. It's done in shifts because not every substitute costs the same amount. It's they get one pay rate for the first few days. Yeah, so I averaged all that up and budgeted it out based on the number of staff. At some point in the year, there were 2 schools that had to stop calling substitutes. For the current year, we had to bring back we had some bring back funds, and the Meet and Confer team chose to apply some of that money to the substitute budget. So this year, our budget is higher than it was last year. And through that same process this year, it's going to be lower again.
Not that 2 years is a
recommendation.
long amount of time to analyze data, but with the budget for substitutes, do we have increased, or do we see like decreased absenteeism as correlated to that? Or not really enough data to tell?
I would,
I can answer.
I would say at this time, there's not any conclusive data. I think people are more aware of taking time, and the principals are more aware of not just approving leave time arbitrarily. So I think there has been a increase, but I don't have any data to substantiate that.
Thank you.
Ready? Okay. So basically, when we looked at comparison districts and their class sizes, we went as far north as Prescott, just very closely north to our competitor, the Madison School District, and Balls. And one of the things it's important to note that we have not increased class size in over 12 years, and Dr. Boyle reminded me that we actually decreased it at one point. So we are one of the last school districts in the valley to impact our classrooms in this way. When I spoke to the people in Prescott, you can see where their numbers lie. They're at, at the high end in 6th through 8th grade, 32 plus 3 or 4. What they engage in when they get over their caps is flexing students to other schools. We've had that when I first came to the district, I want to say 12, 13 years ago, and that was very cost prohibitive because, the students would be out front at Loma Linda, and then they would be transported over to Larry C. Kennedy, and so then you have busing issues. In the Madison School District, what you can see, they're quite aggressive in the 5th through 8th grade at 36. And students, when they have one student over in each section, they do allocate a new teacher. And you'll see on our allocations, on what we're doing is similar to Madison, but not as aggressive in the upper grades. And then in the Balls School District, they have these ratios and these caps, but they have no money to support any overages or any new teachers. So when they go over, they go over. Here's our proposal to have our caps in kindergarten remain at 27, first and second to go up to 31, third and fourth to go up to 33, 5th through 8th to 34. And that has a significant budgetary savings. We also recommend that we continue with the bench that has been very successful this year. We hired 6 teachers at the beginning of the year. They participated in all the same professional development as our teachers. They did not have a placement at the time. They were long-term subs and daily subs until an opening occurred where classes were high. And we're recommending a bench again, and possibly one bench teacher for one of our BE classrooms.
A question, Dr. Lugo. By caps, does that mean we are increasing, the cap is higher than what we currently have as our classroom standard, but if
Yes.
this is a cap, does that mean it's an absolute number? What happens when we hit that?
I think what we need to do is think very seriously when we hit the cap on what kind of support that we are going to give to the classroom. Madison has, when you're one over the cap in every section, we authorize another teacher. We need to be looking at funding aid time when we go over sections and really looking at those details and procedures.
So that's something that's still yet to be worked out then, it sounds like.
Yes.
And currently, if someone is over, it has to be an entire grade level, or a grade level average at a site.
Mhm.
Is that correct, before they get aid time?
With the exception of the mainstream and ELD classrooms, we sometimes encounter difficulties because of the mandate for ELD, and we're not allowed to blend our classrooms to balance them, and so our ELD students need to have separate. So sometimes it occurs both ways. In kindergarten, oftentimes most of our students come in with ELD needs, yet we'll have one classroom as a mainstream classroom at some of our schools. What we found is that one classroom just isn't quite enough. So there will be 40 kids in that one classroom. So we'll allocate another teacher because we can't mix kindergarten students with first grade students in ELD because of the state mandate. So we can't do a band there. So then we end up putting another teacher into that kindergarten, and it's cost prohibitive. But we have to do that because we can't have a teacher with 40 students. But now we have 2 classrooms of 20. So it makes it very difficult. Okay, so just to share with you a little bit of some of the statistics that I looked at prior to making these decisions. And please note that there are no self-contained special education classes in here, and Biltmore Prep, because of the class size, has not been included in this data. So currently, our range in classrooms in kindergarten, classrooms range as small as 17, based on probably the scenario that I just shared with you, and as high as 28. And then if you look at our range in first grade, it's 16 to 32, third grade 18 to 33, fifth through eighth grade 16 to 33. The new model would have a range, and that's if, and please understand my projections are just that, they're projections based on the 100th day. The kids don't always fall in these nice little pockets. So the new range would be 23 to 28. So if you can kind of see how that glass is filling up with the cap. So we're still at 28 as our highest classroom. We're at 23 for our lowest, so we're no longer at 17. And so you can kind of watch those numbers as they go through. Then I looked at the classes with the highest frequency. So for example, if you look at kindergarten, currently we have the highest frequency is 8 classes of 21 students. And if you go across the chart, you look at kindergarten now, with the projections, we've increased our capacity in those classes closer to the standard of 27 to 6 classes of 24. I know this can be kind of confusing to look at, but I thought it was very pertinent that you understand that many of our classrooms are running under.
This, Dr. Lugo, is based on an analysis of the 100th day of our current school year. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay.
Can you go back real quickly to the district comparisons with nuts and involves? Okay, thank you.
Sure.
On to a little bit of happier news after we get past the first line. Our insurance recommendations have come in. Aetna Healthcare has come in at 9.5% increase. That is a significant increase. Yet I'm hearing from our consultant that, and from our benefits coordinator, that we do have a high number of claims and a very high loss ratio, so that this number is not as bad as it could be. We are very seriously considering, even though we're only in the second year of a contract, going out to bid next year because of the continued rise in insurance costs that hasn't been determined yet, but we're thinking about doing so. The great news, though, is none of our other insurance costs have gone up, from Aetna's flex spending to our employer's dental. And those employees who choose to go on Delta Dental is an extra cost above the EDS. They're actually going to experience a 4.6% decrease. Now last year we experienced a 4% increase, so now it's kind of a wash to where we were the year before. Okay, I'm going to turn this over now to Mr. Dees.
Excuse me. Part of some of the agreements that we came up with were the safety committee to incorporate pest control education and cleanliness. There was some concerns at certain sites about having to go through and see if those sites were properly taken care of with the proper materials that we were using. And physical plant and food services to review the cleaning supplies and procedures for those places as well too. Policy review, we wanted to make sure that there was a procedure in place for policies that are assigned, that are referred to the Meet and Confer team. So when a board policy is referred to the Meet and Confer team, the options for review are to go through and have it be reviewed by the Meet and Confer team, or if it was necessary, to have it be a subcommittee or an ad hoc committee that comes along with it too. Okay, staff retention. We recognize as a team that staff retention is a significant issue in our district, and we started up with some ideas and things that we came to some conclusions within the Meet and Confer process. One of which was to try to find consistent representatives on the SWAT team, because the SWAT team has been such a powerfully positive force in our district in more ways than we can imagine. And we also recognize that the Meet and Confer team is a small microcosm, and we are very interested in getting other people's input, and to try to recognize that we as a team do not have all the answers on staff retention. So we were we wanted to task out a committee on staff retention to generate ideas on how we can help with that issue. We also talked about the possibility of a job satisfaction survey within there. District-wide and site mission and vision statements. We realized that it had been several years since mission statements and vision statements had been addressed in the district at the site level. And I'm not sure about the continued meaningful systematic change. Do you remember that? I don't remember that. Okay. Another issue that was coming up where we were talking about ways to try to build collaboration and leadership, teacher leaders within the district, and a mentorship program for new administrators, because sometimes people don't know what they don't know. Rather than jump to the conclusion that you're doing something negative or you're doing something that you shouldn't be doing, a mentorship program in place could very much help for the professional development. And also in order to build some leadership opportunities for teachers within the district, a sense of a buy-in, a sense of feeling like this is a place where you can be successful, to try to develop teacher leaders at the site as well too.
Okay. And James jogged my memory with the systematic change. I think we were talking about that, making sure that everybody was aware when we were going through a change in procedures and those things, and making sure there's professional development prior to evaluation of this change. Familiar?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Thanks, team. Okay. One of the things that we want to make sure of is that we address employee concerns, and we address them appropriately and in a timely manner. So, talking to teachers and principals and all of the leaders in the system about, focusing on the issues and personalities. I plan on doing a vodcast that would be a link where if somebody had an employee concern, that they would be able to go to that and say, okay, this is how I would fill this out, this is how I would do the document, because sometimes I think people are hesitant if to contact if they know who they are. This way, anonymously, they can look at that. And then one thing we noticed was making sure that our current employee concern form had a section in it to say, has this issue been resolved or not resolved? And we've already started implementing that piece. What the biggest plus, I think, that came out of our process, and I think it will make a difference for focusing on staff retention. We've heard over the years that our late start schools, the staff and the teachers have more difficulty attending classes, attending professional development. It also causes the district to stagger professional development for early start and late start. So the collaboration between teachers, for example, if you're a math teacher, you're not necessarily being able to speak to all of your peers when you're collaborating. So having a common start and end time is going to be, I think, a very big plus for our district. And we really want to thank our Director of Transportation for thinking outside of the box and helping to make this work. So all of our regular education classes will begin at 7:30 and end at 3:05. Special education will start a half an hour early, yet the IEPs will still be met with making sure that those students have opportunities for being in the least restrictive environment. Early release days, all of them will now end at the 1:05, and that will enable that collaboration and consistency. Preschool currently, they go to school Monday through Thursday, and the students don't go on Friday. The proposed schedule would be to have them go to school Monday, Tuesday, have the break in the middle of the week, and then come back Thursday, Friday. And the school day will be 455 minutes long as opposed to the 460 minutes. And that's,
James, you want to talk about this one? Susan, I have a question.
Okay.
If special ed is starting half an hour later than regular ed, but they're both being released at the same time on Wednesday, how is special ed still getting the same amount of minutes they need in the school day?
Okay, I think that I might have misspoke. My assumption is special ed on Wednesday will also go a half an hour later, so it would be 1:35.
Thanks.
Thank you for the clarification.
One of the things that we were addressing was individual planning and preparation. This was one of the major issues that was brought up in our conversations and some of the feedback that we received. So we were looking at trying to continue at least continue a common practice which has happened before in the past, which is a 30-minute duty-free lunch, and to every extent possible avoid lunch duty unless a teacher chooses it. Some teachers actually prefer sometimes to have their duty like during the lunchtime rather than in the morning or the afternoon. And we didn't want to take away the option of somebody saying, I would prefer to have this. Because of the scheduling and the way that the schedule worked out, special area classes were reduced from 30 minutes to 45 minutes. There was a clause that we were talking about about meetings in addition to the meetings with the staff coach and the instructional coach, is to have extenuating circumstances for additional meetings, to have that be clarified. So we were going through and saying that a maximum of 4 meetings per quarter with no more than 45 minutes per meeting, because that follows the standard prep anyways that's happening. For the communication of the Meet and Confer document itself, we understand that the people that we have here may not be the people that come into the system, or we do have new people coming into the system the following year. So in addition to the loop outs that we are going to through all the sites for this year, there's also going to be a podcast of Meet and Confer recommendations that go out at the beginning of the year, and there'll be an email that has attachments and PowerPoint so people can see this is what's going to be happening for this current year.
I think I'm better for that one.
This is actually a real exciting thing for our ESP staff. I don't know if you're aware, our standard evaluation system for our teachers, it really comes in a nice booklet form, and it really outlines the due process for teachers and how they'll be evaluated. Last year, a committee worked with Ms. Jonna Ritter to develop a very similar product for our ESP staff. So we hope to have copies for all of our ESP staff and in-service them on the booklet. And then as we have new hires, because in the interest of saving paper, new hires will get the booklet and appendix change for future years, so that'll be available online as well. One of the things that we looked at was looking at the restoration of contract time. When the office managers went from 12 months to 11 months, there was an oversight in the way in which we calculated some of their accrual time, where they started back at point zero. Had we known that that was a concern prior to Meet and Confer, both Mr. Walmer and I would have had that fixed. So I think that's a really good thing that it came out of Meet and Confer and that it was brought to our attention. And the other thing what we are looking at is reviewing the office managers, the director secretary, and the educational secretary's job descriptions and reviewing them with the employees so that they are clear. Just because they're attending the same meetings, they don't necessarily have the same job descriptions. They all have different areas of responsibility. Any questions for myself or the rest of the team? Thank you.
Just a couple of questions. Mr. Walmer, the last few years, well, after Proposition 301 passed in 2000, we were getting a 2% inflationary increase to our base funding from the state until a few years ago it was reinterpreted by the legislature to apply only to transportation based on the language of the ballot initiative. What is our maintenance and operations budget currently?
Our allocation, very roughly, I believe, is about 1.2 million, and we spend about 1.2.
I'm sorry, for not in transportation, our total maintenance and operations.
M&O is about $30 million.
Okay, so if we were to, just doing some quick math here, a 2% increase on that of 30 million, 1% would be 300,000, so 2% would be about 600,000. Is that correct?
Not quite, because it's on the RCL, not the whole M&O budget, but in that ballpark, yeah.
But previously it was on the whole M&O budget in the.
The M&O budget also includes things like carry forward and,
okay, so
and things like that. But yeah, it's close. That's a ballpark figure, yeah.
So if the last, say, 2 or 3 years, however many years now it's been that we haven't been getting that 2% inflation adjustment, we would probably have gotten maybe, let's say, $500,000 extra last year, maybe another $500,000 this year,
Yeah.
and our deficit would be about maybe $1 million less. And then the other question I have is, was there an increase this year or increase going into next year for the Arizona State retirement system?
Yes, a small one.
Okay, so would that have been included in the business realities
Yep.
line that you were talking about? Okay. And just because I know this is something it looks like we have to move to, no, I'm sorry, was this informational only? Was this this does not require. I'll go ahead and just say it now, although we do have votes coming up, that this is just a very obviously difficult work, and so I want to thank those who served on the committee. And it's very difficult for us as governing board members. Ultimately, when you have to fight over pieces of the pie, you're going to have conflict, and people are not going to be happy. And I think the solution really needs to be a level above our district that we need to be fighting for a larger pie. And that's just the reality. And again, if what the voters, I think the intent of voters was being honored, we would not be in this situation. And this is certainly not one of the easy decisions or easy times of year for us as governing board members. This is something that I was appointed to the board in 2008 and then elected later that year. So it's been 4 years now, and every single year that I've been on the board, I had the horrible fortune of getting on the board at that time. And I know Mr. Zaragoza as well, that we've not known a time of increasing budgets. And so I think it is a priority going forward to, well, I think we have a whole lot of other priorities, and we've certainly tried to address that as a board in the past with overrides, and while it could be worse, I really don't want to think about that. So hopefully we're in for better years. I don't know exactly how that's going to come.
Thank you. Before we move on, I did have a white card to, it was you, James. So I'd love to hear if you have further comments on this specific agenda item.
Yeah. Okay. Good evening. My name is James Diaz, the Vice President of CEA. I was tasked by Jason Schnee, the President, to lead the CEA side of the Meet and Confer team this year. Part of this task also includes submitting the results of the CEA ratification process for Meet and Confer to you, the board, for your review. This process is where members of CEA are given the opportunity to vote for supporting the results of Meet and Confer or not. Please keep in mind CEA represents many different types of employees all over the district, each with their own distinct voice and opinion. It is our goal to take these many voices and synthesize them into one voice and still respect the spirit of each individual. I hope you can imagine the challenge in trying to accomplish something like this. It is a very daunting task. With this said, I'm here to inform you that the CEA members have voted to ratify the Meet and Confer document. However, I do not want to paint a picture of peaches and roses here. I would like to point out that approximately 59% voted to support it, 41% did not. This very significant minority deserves to be heard as well. Some of the responses for not supporting the Meet and Confer document in order of the frequency of the comments that we received. I do not understand why band and PE are cut and class sizes are increased when we recently passed an override with CEA's help that specifically mentions maintaining class sizes and preserving special areas. This feels like we told voters in our community a lie. I think it is a slap in the face to shorten the school day by only 5 minutes. The extended day does nothing to improve student learning and sends the message that you are not as important as the program we are using in CSD to the most integral person in making a district initiative successful, the teacher. I find it concerning that we, special education programs, would be the only ones with a different start and end time, as I think it could create issues next school year. Obviously, this has been a very, very difficult year. There are no easy answers. So it is difficult for any of us to look for positive in this process. However, in the interest of transparency and having as much information as possible for you to review to make a decision, we felt it was important to tell the entire story, the good, the bad, and the ugly, so you could make an informed decision. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Back to hard decisions. It's time for item 6H, approval for the notice of intent not to reemploy school registered nurses and physical education teachers for 2012-2013 school year. We just got a lot of information and put that into context. Is there further questions, comments at this time?
Mr. President. How are the, Dr. Lugo, how are the compensation schedules listed here different from previous years? Obviously, I assume there weren't any increases, but are there any other changes that we should be aware of?
Unfortunately, no, there are no increases on the salary schedule. The changes, and I'll have Mr. Walmer tell you about the exact figures, are to the pay for performance amount, and the dates are changes. And then there's also the clause in there last year that we had that employees may participate in the cost sharing for health care, which that has been.
Okay, let me just make sure we're on the right topic here, because this one's gonna be, we actually have the salary schedules following.
Oh, wait, are we on, oh, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
we're not on, that's
So I
right.
wanna make sure that we're
We're
addressing
on the
the
consent.
Yeah.
Withdraw that. Well, I don't draw
But
it.
we'll still have the conversation.
I'll carry that over for the next one. I had forgotten that we were looking at that.
Thank you.
That was my
Yeah.
motion. With that, I move the governing board approve the notice of intent not to reemploy school registered nurses and physical education teachers for the 2012-2013 school year.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed? Motion passes. Now, Mr. Jewett, we are on the item regarding compensation salary schedules.
So is it true then that we've had a salary freeze in effect for a number of years? Do you know when that was? Can you tell me when that started?
When you started on the board and I started in HR.
That's what I thought. So, that's right. So it was, then, my first school year was 2008, 2009, and I don't recall, I wasn't part of the budget negotiations that year, so I don't know, it might have been for that year, but then going for 9, 10, definitely there wouldn't have been.
Correct.
So 9, 10, 11, 12. So this is the 4th consecutive year in which we will have a freeze on salaries. So looking at the certified salary schedule, looking down the left side, and I think I remember you saying this last year, and I want to make sure I remember this correctly. The left side, you look at the number of years, it says. That is the number of years that an employee was with the district at the time the salary, that the freeze went into effect.
Not necessarily. We consider those levels for factors. Now, when the economy is good, and I just hope that, going into the next year, we can offer an increase. The employee will move to the next level of the salaries, of that salary schedule. Employees who have come in with experience, so for example, teachers are afforded 5 years and they're put on level 6 when they come in, so that if they have up to 5 years or whatever amount of years of experience under 5 years, then they'll put on that next level. So we try very hard not to equate, even though it's understandable how that mix-up could occur.
So then, it's not necessarily the case that, say, a teacher whose first year was 2008, 9, or whatever the last year was, that they would not necessarily be at the same base pay as a teacher who was newly hired for this coming year?
Not necessarily. There's a number of factors that could go in there. If a teacher comes in with experience, we still have, we give up to 5 years.
And then is this the agenda item that we are approving? Okay, it is the school nurse compensation schedule. I believe it says registered nurse on there, and I'm not sure if that is still correct.
That is correct. Our intent is to employ one registered nurse, and hopefully one of our current nurses would like to apply for that position. One registered nurse to supervise our licensed practical nurses. And then the licensed practical nurses are on the ESP salary schedule. And the other change that Mr. Walmer made me aware of that I failed to inform you about is last year's, because due to leap year, there were 261 days on the 12-month employee's salary schedule for their contracted work year. This year it will be 260 due to leap year, so they'll have one less work day and one less paid day.
Any other questions? You just look these up, and I don't know if you
I'm
wanna
trying to
at-
look for licensed practical nurse on the ESG schedule, but,
They're on that matrix with the boxes, and it's,
oh.
and the salary schedule that you don't have before you is the career ladder salary schedule, because they're still working on the payout, and that will come at a future date.